Some people walk into a room, and without saying much, the atmosphere changes. Not because they are louder. Not because they are more attractive. And not because they desperately try to be seen. In fact, the people with the strongest presence are often the ones who seem least concerned with attention at all. Which is strange, because most people spend their entire lives trying to become noticeable. They speak faster. Laugh louder. Perform harder. Shape-shift into whatever earns approval. And yet somehow, the more they try to be felt, the more invisible they become. If you've ever sat quietly in a group while someone else naturally pulled everyone toward them. If you've ever felt overlooked, replaceable, easy to forget. Then you've already encountered the hidden psychology of presence. Because presence is not charisma. It is not confidence in the modern sense. And it is definitely not performance. Presence is something deeper. Something psychological. Something almost primal. And the uncomfortable truth is, most people lose it long before adulthood. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But modern society trains people to become acceptable instead. From childhood, people learn that being loved often depends on being useful, agreeable, entertaining, impressive. So they abandon themselves slowly. They trade authenticity for adaptation. And over time, they develop a personality built almost entirely around external reactions. How am I being perceived? Do they like me? Am I enough? Am I important here? The tragedy is that this constant self-monitoring destroys presence completely. Because real presence can only exist when a person is no longer trapped inside the prison of other people's opinions. Most individuals enter social situations fragmented. Part of it is speaking. Another part is analyzing themselves. Another part is anxiety. Another part is seeking validation. Their energy is divided. And people feel that division unconsciously. This is why someone can say all the right things and still feel forgettable. Meanwhile, another person barely speaks, yet everyone remembers them. Because human beings are not only responding to words. They are responding to psychological coherence. To internal solidity. To emotional gravity. Modern culture misunderstands this entirely. It teaches people that power is visibility. That confidence means domination. That attraction means constant stimulation. That influence comes from being endlessly expressive. So people become addicted to performance. Social media amplifies this sickness even further. Everyone is branding themselves. Curating themselves. Advertising themselves. But when identity becomes a performance, the soul becomes exhausted. And exhaustion cannot create presence. That is why many people today appear socially active, yet psychologically absent. You can feel it in conversations. People are waiting to speak instead of listening. Projecting instead of connecting. Performing instead of existing. And deep down, everyone senses the emptiness. Nietzsche once wrote, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." But ownership of the self is rare. Most people are owned by fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of insignificance. Fear of silence. Fear of being ordinary. So they fill every moment with noise. Yet the individuals who dominate a room are often the ones most comfortable with silence. Because silence reveals something terrifying. It reveals whether a person can exist without performing. And many cannot. Presence begins with the first psychological shift. The abandonment of excessive self-consciousness. Not self-awareness. Self-consciousness. There is a difference. Self-awareness is grounded. It observes honestly. Self-consciousness is fragmented. It obsesses over perception. The self-conscious person enters a room already defeated because their attention is trapped inwardly. They are not experiencing reality. They are monitoring themselves inside reality. Every movement becomes calculated. Every sentence becomes edited. Every expression becomes strategic. And ironically, this desperation to control perception creates weakness people can feel immediately. Jung believed that what we repress controls us. And many people repress their fear of inadequacy beneath layers of social performance. But buried insecurity leaks through behavior. In the rushed speech, the nervous laughter, the inability to tolerate pauses, the compulsive need to impress. Real presence begins when a person stops fighting so hard to appear valuable. Because value cannot be performed into existence. It has to be embodied. There is a moment many people experience late at night. You're alone. The room is quiet. The distractions are gone. And suddenly you realize how much of your personality has been constructed for survival. You remember conversations where you pretended to agree. Moments where you laughed to fit in. Situations where you betrayed your own instincts just to avoid rejection. And for a brief second, you see the distance between who you are and who you perform. That realization changes people. Or at least, it can. The second psychological shift is emotional containment. Not suppression. Containment. Modern culture glorifies emotional impulsiveness. People are taught to externalize every feeling instantly. Every frustration becomes public. Every insecurity becomes projected outward. But individuals with deep presence possess emotional steadiness. Not because they feel less, but because they are not ruled by every internal storm. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power. Presence lives inside that space. The ability to pause. To remain centered under pressure. To not emotionally collapse the moment tension appears. This is why calm people often command more authority than aggressive ones. Aggression usually signals inner instability. Calmness signals control. And human beings instinctively trust control. Think about the people whose presence affected you most deeply. Often they were not the loudest. They spoke slowly. Listened fully. Moved deliberately. There was no rush inside them. Because psychologically, they were not trying to extract validation from the environment. They were already anchored within themselves. And this creates a strange effect. People begin leaning toward them naturally. Not because they are chasing attention, but because they are no longer chasing anything. There is enormous power in a person who does not psychologically beg from the world. A person who can sit quietly without needing to dominate. Who can disagree without becoming emotional. Who can exist without constant reassurance. That kind of inner stability feels rare today. And rarity creates gravity. The third shift is confronting the shadow. This is where Jung becomes essential. The shadow is the hidden part of the self, the rejected emotions, the denied desires, the parts we fear others seeing. Most people spend their lives running from this inner darkness. They want to appear pure. Controlled. Good. Acceptable. But the more a person rejects their shadow, the weaker they become psychologically. Because denied emotions do not disappear. They distort behavior unconsciously. The man who suppresses anger becomes passive-aggressive. The person who denies insecurity becomes arrogant. The individual terrified of weakness becomes obsessed with dominance. Presence requires integration. Not perfection. The strongest people are not those without darkness. They are those who have faced it honestly. There is something powerful about a person who no longer hides from themselves. You can feel it immediately. They are harder to manipulate. Harder to shame. Harder to destabilize. Because they are no longer divided internally. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people think presence is something external. But presence is actually what emerges when internal conflict begins to dissolve. When the mask and the self stop fighting each other. There's another moment many people know well. You're in a group conversation. Someone interrupts you. Nobody notices. The conversation moves on without you. And for a second, you feel invisible. Small. Easy to erase. For many people, this moment becomes proof that they are unimportant. But psychologically mature individuals experience it differently. They do not build their identity around constant acknowledgement. Because they understand something dangerous. The need to always be seen is itself a form of dependence. And dependence destroys presence. The people who dominate a room are often the least desperate to dominate it. Because their worth is no longer being negotiated socially every second. This creates freedom. And freedom changes body language. Voice. Eye contact. Energy. Everything becomes more grounded. The final shift is existential acceptance. This is the deepest layer. Eventually a person realizes that life itself is temporary. Every social hierarchy fades. Every performance ends. Every attempt to control perception disappears with time. And strangely, this realization can either terrify someone or liberate them completely. Because once you truly understand mortality, much of social anxiety begins to look absurd. Why spend your entire existence trying to manufacture approval from strangers who are equally lost themselves? Why abandon your authentic self just to fit into crowds that barely know who they are? At some point, psychologically awakened people stop asking, "How can I make people respect me?" And they begin asking, "Who am I when no one is watching?" That question changes everything. Because presence is not built socially first. It is built privately. In solitude. In self-confrontation. In honesty. The strongest presence often belongs to people who survived deep internal wars nobody ever saw. People who learned how to sit with loneliness. With rejection. With uncertainty. And instead of becoming bitter, they became whole. That wholeness is what others feel. Not perfection. Wholeness. A human being no longer fragmented by endless performance. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of all. People are drawn toward those who are deeply connected to themselves. Because most individuals spend their entire lives disconnected. Disconnected from their emotions. Their instincts. Their truth. Their soul. So when someone finally appears who feels internally aligned, it affects everyone around them without effort. Not loudly. But deeply. In the end, dominating a room has very little to do with controlling others. It has everything to do with no longer being controlled by your own fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of invisibility. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being enough. Once those fears lose their grip, something changes in a person. They stop chasing reactions. And begin embodying reality. They stop trying to force importance. And begin radiating quiet certainty. Because true presence is not created through performance. It emerges naturally when a person finally becomes psychologically real. You do not chase attention. You become grounded enough that attention arrives on its own. You do not force power. You embody a self that no longer needs to prove it exists. And maybe that is what people have been searching for all along. Not techniques. Not status. Not approval. But the courage to fully become themselves. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more deep psychological explorations like this. Share this video with someone who has been losing themselves trying to be accepted by the world. And return again, when you are ready to go deeper into the parts of yourself most people are too afraid to face.